Hello there and welcome. I'm so glad you're joining me. By the way, these teachings I do online are just part and parcel of the entire message that I give on Sundays to my church. So if you'd like that full message, go to newdaychurchbrandon.org and you'll find a replay and you'll find a place where all those messages are. Well, let me begin this way. It's been 17 years since my younger brother died, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I received a call from a hospital out in Oklahoma that he was admitted, very serious condition, and probably only a short time to live. Now, if you've ever been in a situation like that, you know how the shock of that, the devastation and hopelessness just sort of overwhelms you, doesn't it? So when I arrived at that hospital, the doctor came to give us the full story. And of course, it was not good at all. So after he left the room, my brother was very emotional. I was too. So I just crawled up in his bed and just held him. And we both just sort of cried it out for a while. Then after a bit, he calmed down and he looked at me and said this, "Mikey, I think I'd like you to read something from the Bible." And I will tell you how I responded to him at the end of this teaching today, okay? Now, I'm in a series called Jesus in His Own Words, where we're looking at who Jesus is according to Jesus. In fact, 7 times in the book of John, Jesus describes himself beginning with the words, "I am." If you've been with me the past few weeks, you know we talked about I am the bread of life, Jesus as the light of the world. And today we're going to look at 2 things, both found in John chapter 10, where Jesus said, "I am the gate," or the door, and he said, "I am the shepherd." Let me read those verses to you. John chapter 10, verse 9 says this, "I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they might have life and have it to the full." And then in verse 14, Jesus said, "I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep." Now, to be a shepherd, you have to have sheep, right? So let's begin by talking about that, the shepherd's sheep. And you know, don't you, that we are likened to sheep in the Bible, figuratively. We are called the sheep of God's pasture. Some people don't like that, but that's just what God calls us. And you may think, well, maybe on the other hand, that is good, kind of sweet. I like that we are Jesus' warm, cuddly, snuggly, bungly sheep, right? But not so quick there. My grandparents had a few sheep when I was young. And yes, they can be cuddly, but they can also be quite cantankerous, ornery, even downright mean sometimes. And they stink, and they poop a lot, especially the little ones that you're trying to hold on your lap, wearing your new Easter clothes right before you are to leave to preach on Easter Sunday morning. Boy, that was an Easter I won't forget. So when we read that God chose to be our shepherd, he did so knowing full well that our relationship with him would not always be some delightful, warm, fuzzy. And compounding that difficulty of shepherding, sheep are just not intelligent. They're just not real smart. And for those of you that don't believe that, I want you to think about a circus. Did you ever see like the Barnum and Bailey circus when it came to town? If so, you no doubt saw a lot of trained animals, trained lions, trained elephants, trained horses, trained dogs. But did you ever see a trained sheep? Probably not. I mean, you can train a donkey, you can train a seal, you can train a bird, you can train a cat, you can even train a flea, but not a sheep. By the way, how many of you have a dog that's trained? Sit, fetch, roll over, play dead, those kind of things. The only way to make a sheep play dead is to shoot it. And then that trick only works one time, and then it's like game over, isn't it? So as a rule, I'm saying sheep are just not real smart, which is not the greatest news in the world for us, being that we are God's sheep. You know what I mean? Could it be that at times we are not nearly as smart as we think we are? Of course, that's rhetorical. The question is, the answer absolutely is yes. Think of it this way. Sheep get lost easily. Guess what? So do we. And not just when going on a trip. Isaiah in chapter 53 verse 6 says, we are all like sheep who have gone astray. Each of us just turning to our own way. You see, a sheep will often wander over here and graze, and then they will wander over there and graze, until after a while the sheep doesn't know how to get back to the sheepfold. The sheep is lost. And the shepherd then has to leave the flock and set out to find that one sheep and bring it back to where it actually belongs with him. The same thing with us. Oh, you know what? I think I'll go this way in my life. I think that's going to make me happy. Or this relationship, that's the person I need that's going to make me happy. Or over there, that looks like fun. Boy, that looks like something I'd enjoy. Oh wait, no, maybe I should try this. And all of a sudden, our life is in disarray. All of a sudden, our life is in turmoil, and rather than peace and abundance. Okay, but let's move on. The shepherd's sheep. Let me also mention the shepherd's love and care for those sheep. Now, there are any number of things a true shepherd would do for his or her sheep. I'm going to just hone in on a couple of them for a few minutes. For one thing, the shepherd always guides the sheep, which begs this question. Since Jesus is our shepherd, how does he guide us? Better still, how do we know when and where God is guiding us to? And by the way, the longer I teach and the longer I preach, the more convinced I am that we are really making the answer to that question way too hard. Look in chapter 10, verse 4. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. And then in verse 14 again, Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Now, like the actual sheep, we as God's sheep follow our shepherd Jesus because we know him, because we are able to hear his voice, because we know him. Often someone will say, but I can't hear, Pastor, I can't hear God's voice. I don't know God's voice. How do I know when God is speaking to me? But remember, first off, Jesus said his sheep, that's you, know him and you know his voice. So that pretty much settles the issue, wouldn't you say? You may not recognize it sometimes, but you know it. And secondly, the problem is not that we can't hear or that we don't know what he's saying when we do hear. The problem is either we don't believe he's speaking because we deem ourselves not worthy, or it is that we just don't believe what we hear can be from him. So, if you want to know how to hear God's voice, it's actually quite simple. Except for those of you who've been steeped in traditional church teaching, it becomes a little more difficult then. The way you learn to hear God's voice, now stay with me here. The way you learn to hear God's voice is to simply just get out there and be. Just live. Just do life. Just enjoy life. And what you will discover is that is because God's Spirit lives in you, you will instinctively know what to do and where to go when you get out there. But what if I sin, Pastor? Oh my goodness. What if you do? Just keep on being anyway. And by the way, quit worrying about sin, because sin is not your issue. You being righteous and fully forgiven by God already, and then believing that. That is the issue. Because I promise if you can get that one thing, that's when the real Jesus life begins to happen. And when the Jesus life happens more, guess what? Sin happens less. So basically, get out there and enjoy the life God's given you. And when and if you get like a check in your spirit or a reason to pause at something, just avoid it, at least for a bit, until you have time to think it through and pray it through. And as you do that, you will immediately recognize what you should do and what you should avoid as you hear his voice. And most importantly, you will realize the power of God in you to help you make that recognition. So I guess what I'm saying is quit overthinking everything. Because the truth is that most of us have enough Bible and God teaching in us to last us 3 lifetimes. Would you agree with that? So what it comes down to is just trusting that. Trusting that God is going to be God in your life. Trusting that the shepherd will in fact guide us. A second thing, the shepherd also provides for his sheep. In verse 7, it says this in chapter 10. So Jesus said again, I tell you the truth, I am the door for the sheep. All the people who came before me were thieves and robbers. The sheep did not listen to them. I am the door, and the person who enters through me will be saved and will be able to come in and go out and find pasture. Now, at the end of the day, the shepherd would build a pen of sorts. It was called a sheepfold, to bed down the sheep at night. It was usually a circular rock barrier that was high enough that the sheep could not jump out, but difficult enough for a predator that they could not jump in. And just to make sure, the shepherd would put brambles or thorns on top of those rocks. And then at night, the shepherd himself would serve as the door. He would lay across the opening. Again, the sheep could not get out, and the enemy could not come in or would not come in. But something else. Something else the shepherd did each evening. He would sit down and call the sheep one by one so that he could tuck them in, if you will. He would caress and rub their wool. He would probe the wool of each sheep, checking for wounds and sores and abrasions from that day's journey through all the rocks and the thorns on the side of the mountain. Then he would pour oil in. You remember in Psalm 23 where David said, you anoint my head with oil? And he would massage it into those wounded areas of that sheep. Think spa time for the sheep. So the shepherd knew everything there is to know about each one of his sheep. In fact, the shepherd always named his sheep, and when he called them, it was always by their name, and they recognized that name and came to him. Look at verse 3. The doorkeeper opens the door for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. Now listen, can you imagine God, your shepherd, speaking your name? Isn't that just the greatest? And it's a reality. It's happening. So what does all this mean? It means that our shepherd provides for us in every way possible. It means he knows us. He knows every hurt, every pain, every struggle that you're going through. He's aware of every tear that spills down your cheek. And not only does he know, he does something about it. In verse 33, it says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. The shepherd is the overcomer, Jesus. He's the overcomer. And he, by his Spirit, is living in you every moment, through everything you experience or walk through. In your moment of pain, in your moment of suffering, when you're down and almost out, whatever the situation, I want you to know the shepherd is there. So I flew out the next morning from Florida and arrived at my brother Craig's room in the hospital. We were told shortly after that he just had a short time to live. And if you've ever been in that situation again, you know it's very devastating. It's a shock, and there's like hopelessness hanging around the room. It just overwhelms you. So after that doctor left, I climbed up in my brother's bed, and we just held each other, and both of us just cried it out that afternoon. He was quite emotional, as you can imagine. In fact, we both were. So after much hugging and crying, he looked at me and said, "Mikey, I think you need to maybe read something from your Bible." Actually, he said, "I'd like to have one of your good sermons." And I told him I couldn't remember my sermons, so that's when he said, "How about just a passage from the Bible?" He smiled a bit, and so I said, "Would you settle for Psalm 23? And he just closed his eyes and took my hand. So I began to quote that psalm. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." But I couldn't go on. I started weeping, and my brother Craig squeezed my hand, but he kept his eyes closed. So I tried it again. Nope. Then I tried it again. Nope. Then finally, one last time, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Holding his hand, again with tears, and I just couldn't go on. And my brother opened his eyes and looked at me with another little smile. And he said, "It's okay, Mikey. That's really enough right there, isn't it?" He was so right. That is enough for all of us. Because when Jesus is our shepherd, we have it all. We'll never lack for anything. So let me end today with this challenge. This week, every time you are confronted with a problem, a need, a fear, a question, or hurt, just quote this out loud right then. "Because the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. He guides me safely. He provides for me fully, and He cares for me deeply." And that's the truth of God from His heart to yours today. Hey, have a great week. I hope to see you again next time for another message in this series. Bye-bye. See you soon.